All right, let's dive right in. If you've spent any time at all around qualitative research, I bet you've heard this phrase. I'm starting to see some patterns in the data. It sounds super important, right? But it can also feel kind of vague. Like, what are they actually seeing? What are they hearing? Well, today we're going to pull the curtain back on that exact phrase. And that really is the big question, isn't it? I mean, what does it really mean to find a pattern? It's one thing to throw the term around, but it's a whole other thing to know what it means when the rubber meets the road. How do you go from, say, a huge pile of interview notes to something you can confidently call a pattern? Let's break it down with a simple and hopefully memorable idea. Okay, I want you to try something with me. For just a minute, stop thinking about your data as just, words on a page. Instead, I want you to imagine it's a soundtrack. Yeah, a soundtrack. Every single interview, every observation you've made, that's a different track on a bigger album. And if you listen closely to that album, you're going to start to hear some musical phrases repeating. That is where we're going to start. So here's the big reveal. A pattern is that recurring melody. That's it. It's not always the loudest, most obvious part of the song, right? But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's something you feel, something you recognize deep down, way more than something you just, count up. It's basically the earworm of your research, the part that gets stuck in your head. And you can think of this melody, this pattern, as your data literally trying to get your attention. It's like a whisper, a signal that's trying to cut through all the other noise. When an idea or a feeling or a particular story starts popping up over and over and over again, that's your data waving a little flag, saying, hey, researcher, pay attention to this. This part matters. Okay, so the metaphor is cool and all, but what does this actually look like in a real project? Let's get concrete. We're going to take this abstract idea of a whisper in the data and make it something you can actually see and understand. So, picture this. You've just wrapped up your fieldwork. You've interviewed 12 different people, all about what it's like to work from home. So now you're sitting on 12 different stories, 12 unique perspectives. Now, as you're going through all your notes, maybe you're listening back to the recordings or just reading the transcripts, suddenly you start to hear it, that recurring melody. One person mentions feeling isolated, another one talks about how much they miss the random office chatter, a third person just comes right out and says, man, it gets lonely. See, even if they're not using the exact same words, 9 out of your 12 people are all hitting that same emotional note. And boom, there it is. That right there is your pattern. It's really not that complicated, is it? It's just the repetition of a core idea across all your different interviews. In this case, that feeling of loneliness, well, that's the melody that you simply cannot ignore in the soundtrack of your research. Now, these melodies, these patterns, they can show up in a few different ways. Sometimes it's super obvious, like shared phrases. You might notice a bunch of different people all using the exact same word, like drained. Other times, it's about common stories, where people are describing basically the same struggle, just from their own point of view. And then, and this is a cool one, you'll spot these implied connections, like when person after person links, say, a lack of good training to that feeling of being totally overwhelmed. But here's a really crucial point. Finding these patterns, that's not the finish line, not even close. In fact, it's the starting line. Think of these little repeated observations as the raw materials, the ingredients you need to build something way bigger and way more meaningful. Let's try another way to think about it. Every single pattern you find is like one tiny seed. By itself, it's just a small, interesting observation. But when you start gathering all the related seeds together, well, that's when you can start to grow a major insight. And that is what we call a theme. The themes are the big ideas, the main story that your data is trying to tell. And the process for getting there is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, you listen for those little echoes, those recurring melodies we talked about. Those are your patterns. Step 2, you group them. All the patterns about loneliness, they go in one pile. All the ones about communication problems, they go in another. And then, finally, step 3, you look at those piles, you step back, and you give that big idea a name. And just like that, you've revealed your themes. All right, let's start to wrap this up. I want to focus on the single most important thing to take away from all of this, because it's really a fundamental shift in how you should be thinking about your data. And this is it. This is the whole ballgame right here. Finding patterns is not about counting. It's about listening.
This isn't about running a word count to see what pops up the most. It's about tuning your ears, trusting your researcher's gut, and listening for relevance, for emotion, for that repetition. You're listening for the story that all of your participants together are trying to tell you. So, next time you find yourself deep in a pile of research data, don't just look for what's there. Listen for it. Pay close attention to those little echoes, those recurring melodies, because even though they seem small, they are so often the breadcrumbs that lead you to the biggest, most profound truths in your research. They often hold the biggest truths. So the only question left is, what are you going to hear?